So the Center for Disability Empowerment is hosting this webinar with the grant, the Ohio Family Network from the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. We are also going to be using the Charting the LifeCourse tools as part of this presentation. It's an amazing program, and you'll learn more about it from one of our speakers tonight. If it'll let me go on to the next screen. So who are we? The Center for Disability Empowerment is a 501c3 non-residential center for independent living that is driven by choice and direction of people with disabilities. What do we do? Our mission at CDE is to provide supports and resources for people with disabilities in order for them to be participants and contributors in their communities as they live, learn, worship, work, and play alongside people who do not have disabilities. Tonight's webinar is called In Loving Memory, Loss and Remembrance Part 2. The journeys of grief are unique to all of us. All losses to death are meaningful, whether it be a family member, friend, housemate, staff, teacher, or pet. Some journeys of loss we can prepare for, and some we can't. We all need opportunities to grieve, including people with developmental disabilities. In this two-part series, we will review and build on the In Loving Memory Part 1 session, where we shared ideas for future planning and personalized bereavement expressions that acknowledges a person's loss and offers them a chance to participate and recover from loss in their own unique ways. Tonight, for this session, In Loving Memory, Loss and Remembrance, Part 2, we will share some of the different types of losses and grief responses, especially when it comes to the loss of a person to death. We share some considerations that may come into play when preparing for a funeral for a person with an intellectual or developmental disability, including the influences of family, customs, spiritual, and culture. Each person's life experience is unique. When possible, it is a good thing to plan ahead on what that might look like, and to even be open to the possibility of a memorial that truly reflects who that person was. We will share some stories, and hopefully you will be able to share some of your own. So tonight, my name is Deb Petermann, and I am a Charting the LifeCourse ambassador and transition coordinator and community connector with the Center for Disability Empowerment. My other speaker is friend Barb Sapharas, who is also a Charting the LifeCourse ambassador and LifeCourse Nexus trainer and coach. We both are siblings and advocates. In Loving Memory, Part 1, we talked about creative ideas to encourage unique expressions of grief for people with developmental disabilities. Our speaker was author Rachael, who is a certified thanatologist. And Mark has written a book called Helping People with Developmental Disabilities Mourn, Practical Rituals for Caregivers. This can be seen in the edited recording on the YouTube channel. In his book, he covered 20 rituals that include using photographs, storytelling, memory objects, drawing, music, writing, like writing letters, daily objects that maybe a person relates to or is identified with the person that they've lost. Packing up belongings. People in group home environments, when they lose someone, their things need to leave the room where they lived and the home where they lived. And he had ideas for that. Creating jewelry that maybe reflect how they felt about that person. A water fountain with stones. The stones might have words painted on them, a person's name, or something they like to do, or a place. That was a beautiful memory idea. He also talked about memory gifts. It might be in a situation where maybe someone had some prized possessions that might mean something to somebody else, whether a family member or someone they lived with. By sharing those items is a wonderful way to help another person in the grieving process. Using Play-Doh, whether just the craft itself or the blending of colors so that people can see this is me, this is them, together, we are together because we've been united in our love and our relationship with each other. And even using food, cooking favorite foods, celebrating with that favorite food and meal with people who also are grieving as well. So Barb, I'm going to go ahead and let you take this one on.
Okay, so for those of you that aren't familiar with Charting the Life Course, it is a way for people, families, professionals to use to organize their thoughts and share with others that support them to plan. It was developed by and for people with disabilities and their families. And one of the tools, or one of the principles, is having a vision for what you want and what you don't want. And we call it a trajectory. So during this evening, our trajectory, what we hope to achieve in the next hour and whatever, 20 minutes, is that we all recognize there are many losses, and that we recognize those losses, and we support people to recognize those losses and to use clear language to explain. I actually attended the session with Mark, and he said we use so many euphemisms. They're gone. Well, if you say they're gone, people are going to wait for them to come back. And he really emphasized using clear language. We'll share some of our personal experience, some of our professional experiences, identifying opportunities for people to participate in rituals and to express grief. Just as important as identifying what we want is identifying what we don't want. So what we don't want is that we don't recognize loss, that we don't even talk about it. What we don't want is that people are not included in the rituals. And we'll talk about a variety of rituals and how people with a range of abilities were actually included to participate in the rituals. And what we don't want is that people aren't given the time and opportunity to grieve and express grief. And not just immediate grief, but recognizing that, as with all of us, grief may not show up immediately. So I'm the doer in my family. I'm the planner, I'm the doer. And so a lot of people, when both of my brothers passed away, when other close relatives passed away, they were like, wow, you're holding it together. And well, I was holding it together because I was coordinating the funeral service. I was talking to the family. I was making sure the food was there and all these other things. What they didn't see is that the grief hit me after the work was done. And then all of a sudden I had time. And so, recognizing that people may need time and we may not see that grief, as many of us may not show grief. Why do we always say to people the first year will be hard, the first Christmas, the first New Year, the first birthday? It takes a long time to work through grief. So we recognize that there's many losses, that we all experience losses. Of course, we think about death, first of all, but think about our losses from the pandemic. I didn't go to church I still don't go on a regular basis because I'm afraid of large groups, because I'm a full-time caregiver for my partner who's very high risk. I didn't travel, and that was something I enjoyed doing. I lost connections with family. I would travel to go see my nieces. Well, I didn't travel. Some people lost employment. And think about when you lose a job, or for the people we support, all of a sudden they were not going to day program, or they weren't seeing the staff that they saw every single day. We also grieve when we lose a relationship, a friendship, someone in your group home moves, staff turnover. I remember I worked for the Cuyahoga County Board, and my training is as a speech language pathologist. So some of my stories, I'll reflect what I did professionally. But I worked with a gentleman who one day came into the day program, and he started yelling. His speech was not very intelligible. He was yelling, he was screaming. He was sobbing, and I had a good relationship with him. He came and sat at my desk, and I just told him, calm down. He used some signs, calm down. He was deaf. And finally, after hours, he calmed down. And what he said to me was, he said, the name of his staff is mad at me. I said, what? What do you mean she's mad at you? And he goes, she's not here. She got mad at me and she didn't come to work.
Oh.
And I just sat there and went, what? And so he took it as, she didn't come to work. She's mad at me, so she's not showing up. And so we did a lot to prepare him. If she knew she was going to be off, she would mark off on the calendar and show him. But there were times she was off, and there were, she couldn't let him know, one of her children got sick, she became ill. And so we had a strategy. If she took off and he wasn't pre-warned, I would meet him at the door, another staff that knew him very well, and we would just tell him, she's sick and she's not at work. And he would go, oh, I'm so sorry. And then he would go off and have a great day. But it took hours for us to realize that what he was experiencing was this loss of his staff member. Think about when people are moved, they lose their community, who they spent time with, their comfort, where they went. Think about when we move. We lose that neighborhood feeling and that comfort of our home. Think of a loss of a roommate, and I'll talk about when my brother passed away. But also the loss of an immediate caregiver. I know when COVID first started, a lot of families were very concerned. What if I become ill and I can no longer take care of my loved one? And so they were doing all sorts. We were supporting families to plan and to put information together so that if they were sick, or if their loved one was hospitalized, that they had information for another caregiver who could come in and support them, and some way to explain it. Loss of predictability or schedule. Oh my goodness, how many of us loved people who, if their routine was changed, that was a loss. And as a full-time caregiver for my partner, I grieve every day because I see him losing abilities and I see our relationship changing. In fact, I had an emotional moment when I was watching a movie with him, and an actor, Ed Harris, went to open a door and let his wife and daughter go in. And I almost lost it because I thought, George can't open the door for me anymore. And that was something he did all the time, help me in and out of the car. And so we grieve and we lose all different types of things, our dreams, our plans.
I also want to say just the loss of our health, you know, whether it's physical or mental. I mean, that's something we all will experience sometime in our life. So thank you, Barb. Let's see. So I wanted to talk about timing and responses to grief. I pulled these up, and by the way, we will have a resource list that I will send with our survey at the probably tomorrow. Send that to you so that anything that we show on here, it has been listed. But I found this online and I thought it was really terrific. So there's different types of timing and responses to grief. We have anticipatory grief, you know, where we grieve while a loved one is terminally ill, and we feel guilty because we're grieving while they're alive. And so sometimes people don't want to share that with anyone because of that reason. And then we have what we call, quote, normal grief, you know, what we expect, you know, what maybe has been our life experience as we've seen people grieve, or our own personal grief. And then there's delayed grief, reactions and emotions that are postponed until later. And I think, Barb, you mentioned that regarding, you know, just doing the funeral preparations and how you do get caught up in the midst of all of that. And so there is a lag of time before you finally can relax, and then it kicks in. And then we have complicated grief, the nature of the loss. And I think, Barb, you were going to talk about that. There was a loss of a staff, and because of a traumatic way, and how they handled it with the staff.
Oh, thank you. Yes. When I was working, we had, in the course of, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks, we lost a staff member who was en route to a home visit and was in a car accident that was fatal. She was killed, and immediately management heard about it, and we were all called at home, those of us that were in management positions, and we were asked if we would start calling staff so they didn't see it on the news. They were pretty sure it would be on the 11 o'clock news because it was a very gruesome accident, very gruesome. And so we called staff. We let them know there would be safe places for them if they wanted to gather together the next day at work. And we also made sure that there were some counselors so that if they needed to talk, but also just to facilitate the conversation. Several of our staff were licensed counselors, licensed psychologists, and also were trauma counselors. And so we told staff they could go, they could, you know, here would be some safe places. They were not expected to perform their job duties. They could do whatever they wanted that next day and other days if they needed that support.
And then there's disenfranchised grief. And this, I think, is one of the biggest things, especially among the population of people with developmental disabilities. Sometimes we assume that their cognitive disability will not allow them to participate in the grief process or even in any service preparations. And so therefore, if we think they don't understand, we don't include them. And what happens with that most times is that when we are not given that space or that opportunity to grieve through rituals, funerals, that kind of thing, we delay the response of the grief, and we're not acknowledging that person's need to know the truth and to understand how this will impact them. So disenfranchised grief is huge. And then there's chronic grief, where there's feelings of hopelessness, disbelief, or avoidance. And then there's cumulative grief, multiple losses within a short period of time. And one of those things, did you want to talk about that, Barb?
I do. Is that okay?
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay. I started when I was talking about the complicated grief. But the cumulative grief, when this woman was killed in an auto accident, a couple of weeks before her death, a woman that we supported through the county board that everybody knew by first name. Now you may think, well, oh, so what? But when I was at the time, the board was supporting 10,000 people. So for everyone to know who this woman was, if you said her first name, they'd go, oh yeah. She passed away very unexpectedly. Then we had a staff member who I had worked with for 20 years and had actually shared an office with. She passed away, and then this woman in the car accident. So within a matter of just a couple of weeks, several of us had significant losses of 3 people, all unexpected. And some people were like, why is so-and-so so quiet? Why is that administrator so, why is she taking it so hard? And at one point I became so frustrated. I said, because so-and-so passed away and she worked with her. The staff member passed away and she worked with her. And then this woman who unfortunately was killed during the day was one of her staff. And I said, it's not one, it's one after the other. And she hasn't had time to recoup because she's been supporting staff through all of these 3 losses.
This is huge. And then there's mask grief, which is forms of physical symptoms of negative behaviors, also very common among this population. And, it could be aggression, just inappropriate behaviors. It could be odd behaviors. These are just expressions that a person is taking to maybe help them process through the grief. And then there's those that don't show their grief. Maybe culturally that was not the cool thing to do. Maybe, you got to keep it to yourself, your feelings to yourself, or maybe a person doesn't even have that opportunity to express that feeling among family members who've also experienced this type of grief. And then there's the secondary grief, and really common when someone lives with a parent or a caregiver. Let's say, a parent in this case, where an adult with a developmental disability may live at home and their mom passed away. Well, not only are they dealing with the loss of their mom, but they may lose their home. They may lose whatever support they have that was part of being the son of his mom. Those kind of things can happen. So these are just other things that we need to consider. And then there's the collective grief felt by a group or staff. Barb, do you want to talk about that?
Excuse me, there's a comment in the chat box. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good evening. This is Snezana. I apologize, Snezana. We just had to put asleep our dog. He was like my soulmate. And one of my two special needs twin girls, had a special bond with Scotty. It was all going so fast that different emotions were just more than overwhelming.
So sorry. And thank you for sharing that. That's, you know, we need to also recognize that four-legged family members are very, very important, and that grief is real. And I hope your twin can, I'm sure, I can't remember, girl or boy, but girls, thank you, thank you. I'm sure you're being very supportive, and just recognize that this is a loss in some of the ways that maybe she's expressing it, or helping her have a way to express it in whatever way is comfortable for her and for you.
Yeah, and one thing I might add, if you have the time to go ahead and listen to In Loving Memory Part 1, because Mark does talk about different rituals, and this may help you think of ideas that might be a little project that you and your daughters can do to memorialize the loss of your pet. So I highly recommend looking back at that. Thank you for sharing that. And again, we are sorry for your loss. They are a big part. A lot of times a pet will be a big part of the grief support. And when they're gone, that makes it even harder.
Exactly.
So, and then there's the absence of grief. So what we think there's an absence of grief because no one's behaving differently. And I want to use an example with my brother. My brother was nonverbal all his life. His main disability was developmental disability. He was on the autism spectrum, and he also had some major aggression issues. But my brother was very attached to my mother. And when he was living at home, if she disappeared from his sight, he would frantically run through the house looking for her. And then when he moved into a group home scenario, he would come home on the weekend and do the same thing. So when my mother passed away, we didn't have any kind of support for grief or whatever. What do we do? How do we help him? And so the only thing we could think of is let him run through the house and see that she's not there. So we did the best that we could, not having any tools or support. But, you know, he did not express signs of tears or anger at that time. But I'm sure the behaviors that followed in the years to come were probably expressions of grief, not having her in his life. All right, Barb.
So what we recognize in charting the life course is when all of us have needs. And we say they fall into three buckets. We all have needs. We have need for information. And we hope that this series, which several of you have asked about part 1, it is available. It is videoed, the taped on the YouTube channel, and it's in chat. But we want to provide information. So we have the need, and we are trying to provide that support, the information. Another area of need is goods and services. What will help us? What are the strategies? So Deb has shared some of the strategies from part 1. You can go watch part 1. Very clear strategies. Mark is wonderful at explaining how he has supported people, how he has encouraged using rituals to help them work through their grief. But there's also other services. There are death doulas, which Mark talked about, and Deb and I were both like, oh, I'm not too familiar with that. I'm not sure about that. There's hospice. And I had the privilege of working with several hospice organizations in Cuyahoga County when I was supporting people with lived experience, with disabilities who were at the end of their life. And also funeral homes provide a lot of information and support, not just the actual burial or rituals, but additional support, resources, references, support groups, all sorts of things. And then the third area of need that we all have, and what we're trying to provide as support, is being able to talk to other people who have been there. So we hope that as you did, and I apologize, I got to check, as you did, Snevana, you shared your experience, and we appreciate that. We are open. Please feel free to put in chat. And I think at some point we'll even open the mic if other people want to share their experiences, because as many of us know, death is something that is not often talked about comfortably, publicly. In fact, I was on a meeting this morning and mentioned that I supported both of my brothers to make informed decisions at the even including the end of their life. And all of a sudden I got an email, somebody connected me to another sibling in Ohio who wants to talk more. And I'm like, okay. So, it's people, we don't talk about it, and we don't have a good network. So we hope this is the start, and that we continue to support each other, because we all experience losses. We also talk about reciprocity. And one of the things that I'm always amazed at is that we don't often recognize that the people with lived experience, people with disabilities, also play a role in their family. And we talk about, you see the icon of the heart. That's when you care about people. The things you do, you show them affection, you show them self-esteem, the stories about their life, and you have a lifetime commitment. So when we talk about reciprocity, I always encourage families to think about, what role do you play in your loved one's life, but what role do they play? So when I think about my brother, Nick, he was one of my niece's godfather. And one of the things that I always recognize that Nick gave and he received. And one of the things when my niece, who is his goddaughter, she's in her 30s now, when Nick passed away when she was a young teenager. And when she applied to college, one day she called me and she said, Auntie Barbie, are you by your computer? And I said, yes, I am. She goes, can I send you something by email? And I said, sure, honey. And she said, will you read it? And I said, sure. And she goes, now. And I said, okay, I'll read it now. And what she sent me was her essay for her college application. And what she wrote was the impact that Nick had on her life. Now, she never told me, she never talked like that about him. But when the moment came, she put it down in words. And then she said, are you okay? Is it okay if I send this in? Are you okay? And I said, absolutely, it's beautiful. And then we also recognize that everybody in a family cares for others and others care for them. And you see an icon that looks like a shield. So, think of what we do to make sure people are protected, they're safe, they can get through their day, and provider of day-to-day care, material, financial, facilitator of inclusion. When I think about, we think, oh, I include myself. But if any of you have kids, your kids pulled you into communities, whether it was their sports community, their music, their school community. But when I think of Nick, from the time I was 4, I knew what a speech therapist, occupational therapist, and physical therapist were. I knew what range of motion was because we had home-based services in 1958, which was unheard of. And so he facilitated my inclusion into this world that became my profession and became my role as an advocate and my role as a sister. And so he cared for me and I cared for him. And he cared for me as an advocate for support because he was very intuitive and he would say, sis, I don't like the way they're treating you. And I'd be like, okay, Nick, thanks. So we recognize that people have reciprocal roles. And this is important as we realize the impact that people with disabilities have had on the lives of people around them who cared about them and for them, but also the impact and how they cared about and for others. So is this me too? How do we support others when someone with disabilities dies? I think this is me, okay. So I love the quote, death leaves a heartache no one can heal, love leaves a memory no one can steal. That's a great quote, thank you. So we want to share a little bit about what do we do when someone with disabilities dies, how do we support others? How do we support the staff that took care of them? How do we recognize that that is a loss? So my brother Nick lived in what we call a congregate setting. He lived with many other people. He had 24-hour support 7 days a week. Nick was someone who in the professional jargon needed total care. He could move 1 or 2 fingers on his left hand. He could open and close his eyes. And he was able to type. He was able to operate his power chair. He was able to operate remote controls, but he couldn't dress himself, move, anything like that. And so one of my concerns was he did have hospice services at the end of his life. And how do we support the staff when Nick was at the end of his life? And I was really concerned about that. And hospice was wonderful because they were like, we're here not only to support Nick, but we're also here to support your family, Sapharas family, but we're also here to support the staff. And so one of the things that was important to me was how can I, after Nick passed away, how can I support the staff? There were lots of staff that supported Nick. And I could not, I was like, I don't have money to buy everybody a gift. I was trying to think, what could I do? And yet I wanted to recognize that they experienced a loss also, just like I had. And some of the staff knew him for many, many years. I think there were staff who knew him for over a decade and supported him. So this is my brother, Nick the Greek. It says Nick the Greek because he did not like, that's the way he liked to be referred to, Nick the Greek. We had a conversation with him before he became ill and was at the end of his life and asked him, and this is going in line with family traditions, cultural traditions. And we asked him, my aunt said, I bought an extra cemetery plot next to your grandmother. And do you think Nick would want to be buried there? Have you made plans? And I was like, what do you mean make plans? No, I haven't made plans. And she said, well, ask Nick. My Nick loved my grandmother who spoke broken English, Nick whose speech was unintelligible. And they would sit and have conversations, and I would just look at them and go, how is this happening? But Nick said, yes, he wanted to be buried next to Yaya, our grandmother. And when my mother said, what do you want on your stone? He said, Nick the Greek. So that is what the stone on his grave says at the cemetery. But anyway, I wanted to honor the staff and recognize they went through a loss, not only the staff, but also the people who lived with him, because some of them knew him for 20 years. And so in the top right corner, Nick passed away the week of Thanksgiving. And I was like, what can I do for staff? What can I do for staff? And I talked to the administrator and I said, you know, I want to do something. Can I bring food for the staff, or what can I do? And she said, oh, we're having a holiday party for the staff. And, you know, we're going to have it catered, blah, blah, blah. And it's just a time when staff can get together. We share a meal and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, can I bring the pastry? And I said, can I bring Greek pastry? So in that upper right corner, to honor Nick and the fact that he was very proud that we were Greek and that he was Greek, I asked the ladies at church, not me, but they made all sorts of Greek pastry, which I took to thank the staff. Also, Nick's nieces and I wrote like a sheet of paper. We put it in a frame and we said something like, you know, thank you for taking care of Nick and loving him for all these years. We appreciate everything you've done. And we hope that you enjoy the pastries and take a candle to remember his light in your life. And so on the bottom left, you see green candles because Nick's favorite color was green. So I looked at, this is before Amazon, folks. So I looked at every store in the greater Cleveland area and bought every green candle that I could find so that every staff member could take a candle. And then I was worried about the people who lived with Nick. And hospice said, you know, we're going to provide support to the people who lived with him. And one day, the administrator called me and said, you know, we're having a memorial for Nick. We'd love it if family would come. Well, my mother just was not up to doing that. My brother Jim was, I don't know if I can deal with that. Okay, so I was the one who went. And the people that he lived with, they had a box. And if people wanted, the people he lived with, the staff who supported him, they had this box on the table. They said some nice words about Nick. They shared their memories. And they said, if you want to put a picture or something on the table, you know, we're going to have a memory table. Well, Nick loves sunglasses, as you can see. And he also loved baseball caps. And if staff went anywhere cool, they would get him a baseball cap or sunglasses. So Nick had sunglasses that were from Marlboro. He had Jim Beam sunglasses. He had any company where you could send in proof of purchase and get a pair of sunglasses. I think Nick had the sunglasses. He had Smith & Wesson sunglasses. He had baseball caps, same thing. And so I thought, what am I going to do with all these sunglasses? And what am I going to do with all these baseball caps? And he also had lots of movies and music because he loved music. And so I said, you know, I said to the administrator, I would love it if anybody wants any of his baseball caps or his sunglasses. He also had little stuffed animals, not that he held, but he would have them like up on the wall in his room. So I took some of those and people were like, really, can we take one? And I said, absolutely. And they said, I remember when Nick won this at a fair. And I was hearing all of these stories, which was so awesome. The other pictures, the bottom right is Jim, Nick, and myself. So my two brothers. I'm the oldest. then Jim, then Nick was the youngest. And the green sunglasses, you know, when we talk about grief and we honor traditions, I had that conversation with Nick that I had had professionally with several people, but then had the opportunity to have with my brother. And that was, how do you want to live the rest of your life? And what do you want to do? And what kind of service do you want? Now, our Greek Orthodox faith was very important to Nick, very important. One of the things he always asked me would be, can the priest come and see me? Can the priest give me communion? And I was like, absolutely, Mom will call the church. And so one day, Nick says to me, sis, I think I want to be cremated. And I went, okay. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you cannot be cremated and buried in the church. And I'm thinking, how am I going to work this one? And all I kept thinking is, my mother's going to kill me, because I told Nick, I'll do whatever you want. And I'm thinking, my mother's not going to go for this. This is not going to be good. So I said, oh, okay, Nick. And I didn't want to react. So, oh, tell me about why you would like to be cremated. Tell me more. Help me understand. And he said, sis, I don't want people looking at my eyes. In the Greek church, the casket is open until the very end of the service, and people have the opportunity to say their last goodbye. The family gives their last goodbye and the casket is closed. Now, we both knew that. We've been to funerals. Nick knew that was what was going to happen. And he goes, I don't want people to look at my eyes. And I said, Nick, I have to tell you that if you want to be cremated, you cannot be in the church. And I'm thinking, what priest do I know that might do a favor? And Nick said, no, I want to be in the church. I want to be in the church. I share this story because we often tell people what they can and cannot do. And I felt so strongly that I had to give my brother all the information so he could make that decision. And he said, no, I want to be in the church. And I said, then the casket will probably be open. And he goes, but I don't want people to look at my eyes. So God works in wonderful ways. I said, Nick, how about a pair of sunglasses? And he goes, oh, yeah, sis. And I said, Nick, what pair would you like? And as only my ornery brother could, he said, sis, I think I would like a new pair. And I thought, he has like 20 pairs of sunglasses. So I said, what color? And he said, green. So I went out and bought him a pair of green sunglasses. You see the Rocky, because he loved Rocky. And so I also put his movies on the memory table and made a box of movies and music and gave it to the recreation director and said, please, if you can use these, please use it. But the one thing I did that was kind of against the tradition of the Greek wake and the Greek funeral was, it's very somber and people come to the funeral home. Well, I thought, this is not Nick. Nick always had a big boom box and he always played loud music. So the last CD he had bought was Cher. Oh, thank you, Deb. You put the Cher thing. Yeah. And so when people walked into the room, I asked the funeral director, I said, I want to put the boombox on. He goes, you're the only family here tonight. So when people walked in, that boombox was sitting right there when they walked in, and Cher was playing loudly. And as staff came in and as the people he lived with came in to pay their last respects, they were like, Nick's music is on. So it was a way to honor him, but also to represent him in a human way. So I think that's it for me for that. I think I covered traditions, our culture, and also just respecting the other people and trying to find ways to include them and also make the service, which is very ritualistic. I know we grew up in a very ritualistic, faith-based community, but to add some of Nick in it.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say, address with the culture, that in each culture, death is associated with rituals and customs to help people with the grieving process. So rituals offer people ways to process and express their grief. They also provide for the community to support the bereaved. a person who is bereaved is in a period of grief and mourning after a loss. And so we're hoping tonight, with beginning with Nick the Greek, is to maybe address some non-traditional opportunities to memorialize a person. So I'm going to move this on.
Can I just add, oh, can I add, okay. So I mentioned that there was a memory table and everyone was given the opportunity who knew Nick to write a note to us, the family, and they had a box covered in purple paper because that's the color of death and resurrection. And his provider was a faith-based provider agency. And they gave me the box, and I will tell you, I could not open the box. And I took it home and I thought, how am I going to read this? And it took me a while to be in the mindset to open the box and read the notes, but they supported every single person who wanted to. So I will tell you that some of the pieces of paper was just scribbling. And then underneath, somebody wrote, Mary wants you to know that she loved Nick's music, written by so-and-so staff. So everyone had the opportunity in whatever way they could to share their memories, their thoughts with us, the family.
And it also supports recognizing the loss to all that are connected to that person. All right, so I'm going to talk about some things that I was involved in. I oversaw the disability ministry at my home church for a long time, and I had another sibling call me saying that her sister Susan had passed away, and they needed a place to have her memorial. And I did not know Susan, but these were the cues that her sister gave me: that she loved balloons, she loved ice cream sandwiches, and she loved clowns. And she had a huge closet full of different clown outfits that she had gained over the years. And so we had the memorial service, we had helium balloons, and of course we had ice cream sandwiches. But what was really cool is that her staff members wore all her clown costumes to the memorial, to the service. And so it was so personal because it reflected who that person was. And so some people might have a struggle with, this is not a traditional service, but you know, we're hoping that you will consider the possibilities that you may not have a traditional service, because that may not really represent who that person is. But at the end of the service, we went outside and we released the balloons so that Susan could enjoy them in heaven. It was a beautiful time, and just keeping it simple and relevant. And then I want to talk about one of my Sunday school students, Rachael. Rachael had a great sense of humor. If you'll see her on the upper right side, she loved to color. She was great at making friends. She knew when she was sensitive. If someone was having a sad moment, she would pick herself up and sit next to them. And she was just a great friend. So she also loved sign language. You know, it was limited. She did have developmental disabilities, but she loved signing, and it helped her to worship. And then on the bottom here is something that we do every week in my class. We have colors, if you can see them on the bottom right. There's the purple, black, red, white, blue, green, and yellow construction paper. I have a lot of non-readers in my class, so we use the colors, and this is just the gospel message. And so we did this every week. So the last color is yellow, and the last color represents heaven, where there's no more tears and no more pain. So this is something very familiar that our class knew, because we did it every week together. And so I went ahead during the service. I created a lesson that was geared towards her classmates so that it was at their learning level. And we talked about the gospel colors and how Rachael no longer has tears or pain, and that she is with the Lord. The other thing that we did, well, I did, I should say, is she loves sign language. So I signed a song. And it took a lot of practice. I'm not fluent in sign language, but it was reflecting what was important to her. She loved music. But I do want to end this with a great story that one of her nephews shared at her service about Rachael. And I told you Rachael had a great sense of humor. Well, her nephew, then about 28, but when he was about 14, he was his Aunt Rachael was visiting, and Aunt Rachael would spend the night. And so she decided one night, she had learned how to, and I asked her sister if I could share this, and she gave me her blessing. She said that, Rachael came into the family room and proceeded. She learned how to take her bra off without taking off her shirt. And next thing they know, she pulls the bra out and she says, "Look, the great Brazzini." And of course, everyone who knew her sense of humor, and that was so Rachael. We expect unexpected stories as well, because it reflected who she was as a person. And of course, we truly still miss her to this day. And then I want to talk about my brother, Rodney. So Rodney, first of all, was known as a coffee stealer. His only pleasures in life were drinking coffee, lots of soda, and he loved liquid soap. And so some of you might appreciate this and know some folks that also do that. But Rodney was known at his workshop as the coffee stealer. When he came in the room, everybody said, "Rodney's here, hide your coffee." And so if you'll notice, my sister, my brother and I on the upper left, my sister was a special ed teacher for 38 years, I think. And this is the only picture I have of my brother actually smiling and looking at the camera. So this was a big deal. And I remember saying to myself, I can die now. I now have a great picture of Rodney. If you'll notice also, there's a table and it says coffees on Rodney. So Rodney, had all kinds of behaviors, but he had this tendency towards the end of his life to pour a little bit of that coffee on him and then snip his shirt. A behavior I can't recommend, but that's who he was. So, and I'll just say this real quick story is on the day he died, and I actually picked up his obituary because we talked about it. The day he died was Mother's Day. And my brother never spoke a word in his life. And I wrote this in his obituary. So sometimes writing something personal in the obituary, we might have to be a voice piece for someone who cannot talk for themselves. So I went, Rodney was very special to our family. He was also a man with specific special needs. Although he was never able to speak a word, the impact of his life speaks volumes to our people affected by disabilities. Even though we are deeply saddened by his unexpected death, we are thrilled to know that Rodney was able to say for the first time in his life, "Happy Mother's Day" to our mother on Mother's Day. So something that just speaks of our grief, but our joy that he is free from that. So I went ahead and brought a picture. I brought his brochure. And as you look on the right side, you'll notice that it has Tim Horton cups as the border. We specifically put that in there, again, because of his coffee thing, all right? And then we also put the coffee stain on it. Because again, this is part of who Rodney was. And one thing I wanted to tell you about Mother's Day, that day after he passed away, we decided to go to a Bob Evans. And the whole day obviously was wrecked. And we were waiting for my daughter to come, and the waitress brought 6 cups of coffee, and there were only 5 of us there. And she said, oops, I brought an extra cup of coffee, and I'm sure one of you will drink it. Well, we all looked at each other, and we proceeded to put that extra cup of coffee in the center of the table. And then we put packets of sugar around it, and we saluted Rodney. And then we put our fingers in our coffee, put a drop of coffee on our shirts, and we took a whiff. So, so that's what happens when you grow up in a family such as ours. If you also notice, I put the poem, The Dash. The Dash is a poem that's commonly used in funerals, but it talks about a person's life. You know, we have our birth date, we have our dash, and we have our death date. And so what we did is we included that in the bulletin, and then we asked people who attended the memorial to fill in Rodney's dash. He was unable to speak, but he did impact people's lives. So we took that opportunity to use that poem. And then in the bottom left, you'll see there's a coffee, the pens are put in coffee beans. All right, so family flowers. My brother, again, coffee and soda. So our family flowers, I bought a bunch of coffee mugs. And I bought flowers that could be planted at his group home. So you'll see that we have them represented on the table. Someone had a big sign where the coffee maker was and said, "Coffee's on Rodney," of course. A staff brought one of their collages that they had in their office, and she's known him for 25 years. And I mean, the kind thing is she offered to give it to me, but I knew this is more important for her to have and to keep. And but I love the fact that she brought that. And then on the bottom left, here's our sense of humor again. You'll see that there's 2 liquid soaps between pictures. I'm sorry, I had to do it, but you know, anyone that knew Rodney knew that we had to hide the liquid soap wherever he was. Otherwise, all the liquid soap disappeared very quickly.
Excuse me, Deb, you have a question.
Okay.
Nizana says, are you still teaching, working in church with a group that has special needs?
Yes. I have a teen adult class, and the reason why I combine those ages is because I don't want the hiccup to happen when they graduate from high school, when typically people lose their friends. So we start from teens and we go into the adults.
Thank you.
Okay. So Barb, I'm going to go ahead and give this to you.
Okay, thank you, Deb. I love your memories, and I love the way you honored Rodney. Never met Rodney, but I'm chuckling along with you. It's like I know him. So part of my professional career, before Nick became ill, before I had to support him through the end of his life and Jim through the end of his life, I, as a speech language pathologist, I had the opportunity to work with people who were at the end of their life that were receiving supports from Cuyahoga County, because we wanted to make sure that people were able to make informed decisions. And part of making informed decisions is you have to know all the information. So the first person that was referred, you know, we had never thought about this. And all of a sudden, this was 20 some years ago, we were like, oh my goodness, how are we supporting people to make informed decisions? And I got a referral for a gentleman who had talked his whole life. He was in his 60s, had had throat cancer a couple of years prior, so he had a laryngectomy. And his case manager sent a referral and said, he now has a tumor growing around his carotid artery. The doctor says it is terminal. I don't know what he wants. And so the referral came right before Christmas break. And so the response was, how imminent is this? How quickly do we have to move? And she's, I don't know. So I went to meet with him and with one of our nurses who had been a hospice nurse. And we were very focused on informed decision-making. He did not have a guardian. And we sat with him, and his provider could not, he lived in his own apartment. He had staff support, and I lost my train of thought because I tried to read chat. I'm sorry. The provider became so emotional. And so she left the apartment, and we asked him if we could sit down. He showed us where we could sit on the chair. He had gotten therapy, but he would not use an artificial larynx. So he did not speak. And the nurse said, we're here to meet with you. We want to talk about your health. And we want to, share some information with you. And he dropped his head, and she said, you're sick. And he nodded, and everybody said, he doesn't know, he doesn't understand. We can't tell him. How do you tell somebody they're dying? And he did this. And the nurse and I just went, yes, you are dying. And then we sat with him and wanted to make sure he understood his possibilities, what could happen. Did he want surgery? Did he want radiation? And went through all of his options. And my biggest challenge was staff. I know what he needs. He should have this. And I was like, it's not your decision. He had no family that we knew of. And then all of a sudden one day, every time we went, he would put 2 chairs for the nurse and I by his bed. He had a studio apartment, and he would tell us to sit on those 2 chairs. And then he would take his Simpson, I forget, whatever the Simpson, the character, and he would hold the doll while we talked to him. One day he opened a metal box, and in the metal box, he had another metal box. This is a man who had grown up in a state institution. And he pulled out a photograph, and we looked at the photograph and we said, who is this? He looks like you. And I said, your father, your brother? Do you know where your brother is? Do you have anything from your brother? So we asked the provider, we said, do you know of a brother? And she goes, I don't know. His records from the institution are in our archives. Let me request them. She found an address for the brother, reached out. It was a nursing home. The nursing home said, I have to get back to you. The nursing home social worker contacted this man's adult children, who said, what do you mean my father had a brother? And in the last months of his life, he was able to meet his niece and nephew. They lived in Columbus, he lived in Cleveland. They met halfway, they had breakfast. And the funny part of the story was they never knew their father had a sibling. And they were eating breakfast, and the gentleman I was supporting took hot sauce and put them on his eggs. And they gasped because they said, the only other person we've ever seen do that is our father. And they were able to connect with their uncle and spend some time. The provider made sure. The other lesson that I learned is he had a girlfriend, and we all knew he had a girlfriend from the time he lived in the state institution. She lived in one group home, he lived in his apartment. And so we, the 2 providers, they had separate providers, made sure they had time to spend together. But when he died, she was treated like his spouse. She was escorted to the front pew. The people he lived with, he lived in an apartment building. They hosted the coffee. She greeted everybody. And so she was treated with that respect of the role that she had in his life. And then explaining to coworkers. So I also supported a woman who was at the end of her life. She had worked, she did maintenance, night maintenance, and she was part of a crew. And we told her coworkers that she was very sick, she was not going to be able to come back to work. And we asked the family, the coworkers said, but we want to see her. Why can't we see? Can we go to the house? And the family was, they were like, we don't want to have a lot of people coming, blah, blah, blah. But they agreed to have her go to one of our day program sites. And her coworkers from the night crew, they had like a pizza party and cake and some food that she liked. And they bought, a couple of them bought her gifts. And one woman bought her a little rug that you see on the slide. And we asked her, why did you buy her a rug? And she said, because she's in bed a lot. And when you get out of bed, your feet should touch something soft and warm. And so she bought her a little rug. Go ahead, Deb.
Okay.
So we also know that there are other supports for people. I worked with several hospice agencies supporting people who were at the end of their life. Nick had hospice supports. My mother currently is living with dementia and she's at the end of her life. She has hospice supports who are just wonderful. But we also have to look at advanced directives. And with some of these people that were at the end of their life, we had nothing in writing. And so part of my role was to explain advanced directives to them and see what they wanted to do, what they didn't want, and also check their decisions over time. So not just once. And the same with my brother. I would ask him multiple times, so are you still okay with being buried in the church with the casket open? Because I wanted to make sure his decision stayed the same. And for the gentleman who could not speak, we needed for him to have a way to let us know he wanted to change his mind about something or talk about something. Because he couldn't talk, what I did was I took a photo of myself, I mounted it on cardboard, I wrote my cell phone number on the back, and I said, if he hands you this photo, call me immediately at this number. And he knew, give it to, and there were a couple staff he trusted, and we told them, if he gives you this card, that means he wants to talk to us. Call me right away. But there's also a living will. This is where I don't know these services, Deb. I'm not real familiar with an end of life planner or a death doula.
Well, it's interesting because today I decided to do some research online, and I actually put two links related to this on our resource list that I'll be sending after this. End of life planner is basically someone who comes in and says, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? And so it's actually being methodical and asking for people's wishes. I don't think, I think there is a fee to it, as well as with a death doula, there's a fee. It's just, when we have a birth doula, they're making the environment of the room the way the mom wants it to be as she prepares to give birth. It's very similar in when someone's preparing for their imminent death. So it's a very quick little video, but I thought it was very helpful. So I added it to our resource list.
And Deb, there are a couple questions. One is from, let me read it, from Donna, who says, I work in a school with a student that's involved with hospice and at the end of their life. Any examples of how to help staff and students experience anticipatory grief? When I knew my brother was at the end of his life, see, I have trouble talking about it. I talked to my nieces, and because they knew Nick, they saw him, we had family celebrations together. And I first started with, now, they called him now, which is a variation of Godfather in Greek. And I said, he's very sick. And they said, and they asked over time, how sick is he, Auntie Barbie? Is he going to die? And I said, yes. And they said, when? And I said, I don't know. And so one of the things that I had them do was make a collage of pictures with their Uncle Nick. And I had them do it in my head. I thought, we'll put it in the funeral home when, for the wake. But they wanted to give it to him because they wanted him to see all the pictures of the two of them together. And each niece wanted to make her own poster because God forbid they should share a poster. But anyway, so even doing that, my niece wrote a note, the younger niece, not the one that wrote the college essay, but the other niece wrote a note to Nick and she put it in the casket with him. So I think some of these, rituals for anticipatory grief, having an opportunity to say goodbye in whatever way is meaningful. The woman who bought the rug for her friend, I want her feet to touch something soft and warm. Writing notes, sharing a memory, writing in a book, in a journal, and just each person just doing whatever they want. I think just helping them understand that it's okay to be sad, and what do they want to share with that person? Maybe the impact they had on their life, or something they love about them or they like about them,
Yeah, and again, the rituals that Mark had expressed in his book might be a place for you to look at. They're very simple ideas. They're low cost. Anyone of any age can do it. But I would think you think if this is a child that you want to do things that are childish. So to make it age appropriate. I don't know if that answers your question. I do have some book resources on that list that are geared towards children that might be helpful as well. I've been trying to research this, and believe me, there's not a lot of information on this topic. So hopefully that answered the question.
There's a question from Snezana. You are in Ohio, I hope, not in Texas or California. Would it be possible for me to bring the girls 16 to your adapted religion classes?
Yes. Why don't you, I will email you, since I'm sure I have your email address, and I'll give you that information. That way we can prepare ahead of time what we do, kind of like a little social story. And then we can set up a time to meet. Sounds great. So we have one slide left. Marley, did you say you have something?
I was going to ask if you'd like me to include the Vineyard Church's website in the chat for Snezana.
Yeah, it's vineyardcolumbus.org.
Yep.
But with her contacting with me, I am the lead teacher, and I like to know people before they come so that we're really preparing a safe place for them to be, and when we can take it from there. Sounds great. So Barb, we have two things I want to cover. We want to do the integrated supports as well. And if you wouldn't mind, after that, touching on the mapping relationships, something that we're planning for our next session. So go ahead and I'll give it to you.
Okay, thank you. So this is another principle from Charting the Life Course, that we all need help, and we get help from many different areas. So there are 5 areas. So when we talk about how do we support loss and remembrance, what personal strengths do we need? Well, we need to be clear and honest. We need to look at the family rituals, the faith-based rituals, whatever is important to the family and related to their faith. We need to make sure that we include everyone. And we need to recognize that, my brother knew a lot about the Greek funeral traditions because he had previous experiences and previous losses. So when I talked to him, he knew the casket was going to be open. technology that might help us. You know, Deb said she's been doing research. You can find some information on YouTube. Some people have used electronic frames and actually taken, instead of the old way of my nieces making a collage, using an electronic frame and putting pictures in that so people can see. Making recordings, you know, with the kids in the students, would they like to make a video and send it to their fellow student? That's something the student can watch, the family can watch with them in their comfort whenever they want. Developing photo albums, and Mark Markel's website, because he does have resources, and LifeCourseTools.com, of course. And then looking at relationships that support us, you know, others who've had that experience, others who have had loss. Deb and I, when we met each other professionally, we also connected when we learned we were siblings, but not only siblings, but siblings who had lost our brothers. And we were like, oh, we have too many points. We have too many points. This is really weird. And then what's out there to support everyone? Hospice, funeral homes, the library, death doulas. And then eligibility specific, you know, maybe you're eligible for counseling. Some providers, you know, provide supports. Your own faith-based community might provide supports. And Deb said she's going to send a more in-depth, complete resource list. So the last thing is, you know, we talked about reciprocal roles, that we believe that everybody has reciprocity in a relationship. They give and they receive. And so we're going to talk about mapping relationships and how to look at relationships and categorize the roles that different people play, which helps families and people when they're looking at who can I access, who can help me, who can take over when I can't. Anything else, Deb? Did I cover?
No. So we haven't planned that date yet, but mapping relationships. I know that Barb has a mapping relationships webinar in the morning, tomorrow morning, and I'm sure you know, I don't know, maybe you can put that information in the chat. I don't know how quick you are, Barb. But they will not be recording that. But when we do mapping relationship, we will record that. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And we really appreciate you being part of this. We're hoping that you will feel empowered to think outside the box, to consider people, their interests, their needs, their customs, their traditions, their family relationships, you know, where they are in the grief process, all these things to help a person who is not only grieving a person they've lost, but also grieving the loss of a person with a developmental disability.